Welcome back to our XTraw AI podcast, where we have interesting conversations in the context of AI. And today, I'm going to talk about the intelligent content layer. And with me is Rand Wacker, head of product strategy at Box. Welcome on board, Rand.
Great to be here. Thanks very much.
All right, Rand. So I know you've got a tremendous amount of experience coming in from uh, various different aspects. And I know you're heading the product strategy at Box. So before we get into this, I would like to get a bit into your personal or the professional backstory. I know you have done a lot of these things. So how did you, what shaped you in getting into this kind of a role, and what uh, or your past experiences and other things?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I mean, I started at Box almost 13 years ago, which seems really weird to say in Silicon Valley, but it's been a great journey overall. And what brought me here was a long career in enterprise, infrastructure, SaaS, early cloud, and especially security. And it was interesting. I worked at a company called Ironport that was acquired by Cisco. We end up then running the whole Cisco security BU back then. Still have a bunch of friends that are there and doing some really interesting stuff on sort of the network security side. But the interesting thing about security is at the end of the day, you're trying to secure very often the content.
Mhm.
You're trying to protect the data in an organization. And one of the things that really brought me to Box was that, what Box is doing is helping people work better every day with their data, with their content, with their documents, and to be able to actually apply security and focus in on somewhere where the data already is super interesting. So the journey was really sort of taking those security pieces, those enterprise pieces, and bringing it into a tool which back in 2010 was the first tool that let people collaborate externally with other people, share stuff to their mobile device and all that kind of stuff, and to do that securely. And that was sort of the early time here at Box back then.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's a great backstory. And I know this space is evolving so much that it is it is no longer like storage, but it is more like content as a system rather than content as a storage. I think this is where I think we are kind of gonna get into our conversation later, and we talk about this intelligent cloud and other things. But before getting there, I know most enterprises today use Box on a very regular basis
Hmm.
without even realizing how much AI is embedded into it.
Hmm.
What's one example of that invisible AI of Box that most users take it for granted?
Yeah, great question, and it's evolved quite a bit overall because we've actually been doing a lot with regards to AI and predictive analytics and security for a long
Right.
time. And so one of the things is when you have direct access to what people are doing with your data in a system, you can make much better determinations about what might be going on that's fishy. So, for example, for a long time, Box has had the ability to detect what we call sort of anomalous behavior. Someone logging in, from one country and then 10 minutes later logging in from another, or someone who normally would download 10 files a week, all of a sudden trying to download 1,000 files, and those kinds of things. And so, for a long time, from more of and this is sort of the traditional security of pattern recognition, machine learning, those kinds of things. We've done that built in, and that, we all got to remember that's an early version of AI as well. It's changed a lot now with LLMs, and we'll definitely get into that. But with Box, there's a huge benefit to both the security side as well as definitely the new generative AI side of having direct access to the content as opposed to it being sort of bolted on from the outside.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know Box has evolved from a content management into what now many call as this intelligent content cloud. right?
Hmm.
From a product strategy lens, what capabilities define that kind of a shift? Could you highlight at a high level what is
Yeah.
that?
So it's actually so the market that we're in has traditionally been called enterprise content management or ECM,
Right.
and that's evolved. If you look at Gartner, IDC, Forrester, they've changed those definitions into content services or content platforms or whatnot, and now the intelligent part is coming into it. But it has been for a long time the domain of some pretty legacy data center based players where their strength is in not just the storage of files, but the compliance, the policy, the governance, and often the workflow around those files. So if you're doing, for example, FDA approval processes for a new drug or medical device, then you have to go through a very structured process, and
Mhm.
the files, the content, the data that's used for that is under very strict compliance regulations, both for how it's treated in the process as well as how it's retained afterwards. And so all of those things go beyond just basic collaboration and file sharing, much more into this content management world. And some companies would think, oh, well, we're not, a regulated industry, in financial services or healthcare or something like that. But the truth is, every company out there, as soon as you have employees, you have compliance regulations. If you have any type of public financial filings, you have compliance regulations. All of these different things require much more than just having a simple, data store or team drive to throw stuff into.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I think this is where I know Box is predominantly focused on this unstructured data. I think the minute you talked about compliance and security and all these kind of things, I know there are solutions out there. I think the general perception is that, hey, these are huge enterprise companies and they have so much of structured data, and why, and there is a lot of transactional information out there, but what about this unstructured data? And so I know these
Yeah.
enterprises are flooded a lot with these unstructured data nowadays.
Yeah.
What do you think about and I believe here you think about content not just as files, but it's more about enterprise data that is embedded into these, right? Like, could you
Yeah.
speak a bit about that? Because
Yeah.
when the aspects of unstructured data come into the whole game, playing field changes quite a bit.
It is, and it's a really important aspect when it comes to AI because
Right.
these AI platforms, these LLMs, are unlocking the potential for unstructured data, or in the simplest term, the files and documents you have running around your organization. And the distinction would be structured data, is generally considered to be, the stuff that is in your Salesforce databases. It's the stuff that's in your Snowflake and your Databricks. It is, tabular information that you can then go and query using SQL or other stuff, to get something where it's all kind of organized like that. Versus unstructured data is the documents, the spreadsheets, the videos, the images, the PDFs, all these things. And an interesting report out of Forrester a couple of years ago was that in most organizations, the average percentage, in fact, just guess, what do you think is the average percentage of structured versus unstructured data in most organizations?
That's a great question. I think I believe the unstructured information is going to be much more
Hmm.
heavier than structured information. If I'm right, I think it's definitely tilts more towards unstructured information. Is
Yeah.
it right?
Definitely. And our initial guess was like based on conversations we had with customers was like 80%. They did a rigorous, sort of survey and came back that 93% in most
Wow.
organizations, over 93% of the data in their organization is in this unstructured form. And the thing, and this sort of gets into the AI world and these LLMs, the thing that's really powerful is that for a long time, that's been sort of an opaque a set of information where you might be able to organize stuff in files and folders. And if you were really diligent, you'd put some metadata on stuff, manually, and you'd do some keyword searches and those kinds of things. But LLMs, from the purpose of being able to actually read and understand a document to the level that a human often can unlock the potential value in that huge amount, that 93% of unstructured data, which is really the lifeblood of your organization.
I think that's a great That's a mind-blowing statistic, I would say. Like when you said like 93% of this information is unstructured, and this is
Yeah.
where uh, I think now let's get into. I know enterprise AI is so much dependent on this high quality data, right? And then much of the data can it actually lives in these documents and in
Yeah.
different forms. So, from your perspective, how does this uh, unstructured content can become more usable for AI systems?
Yeah.
And what technical challenges are these organizations having in making that it is or making it more AI usable?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is where it becomes really important for people to start thinking about the architecture of their AI implementations and how that intersects with the architecture of their content and data plans throughout their organization. Because sort of similar to security, where I was talking earlier that, the closer you are to the content, to the files, the better you can make security determinations based on the user behavior. Same thing with the AI. There's a huge difference, for example, between, taking a few files from your box or other store and dropping it into like enterprise GPT or even worse, public personal GPT and asking some questions versus unleashing, a well-tuned set of agents against the entire set of data you have access to, and letting it find the most important stuff. Like we just literally yesterday released here at Box a new, it is a very simply named the Box agent. But the power of this thing is that, we've already got the data. We've already done all the pre-vectorization. We've, got, everything indexed and keywords and all these kinds of things. It can go through and find out of 500,000 files. This is just my own personal account. And by the
Mhm.
way, this is all permissions aware. So it's only accessing stuff that I have access to. But out of 500,000 files, it can go and find the most, seemingly relevant 200 to my question and then narrow that down to another 10 and then use those to actually build a huge report very quickly on these various things. And so if you think about AI, it's not just about having it, brainstorm a haiku out of thin air. It's about having to have context on your organization and the real questions that you have, not just the few files that you brought over or the prompt that you wrote. It's about giving it access to the intelligence in your organization because so many organizations run on this whole thought of tribal knowledge and what humans have locked in their heads. You've got to
Mhm.
give the AI similar tools to get similar efficacy out of them.
True, true. I think this is where I think it becomes interesting to move from experimental phase into the productionalizing phase, right? I think this is
Mhm.
where many companies are now trying to move from these isolated AI experiments to operationalize AI into these embedded workflows into their enterprise business processes or
Yeah.
enterprise workflows. So, what is that you see that will be missing if you do not realistically tap into this kind of uh, unstructured data, unstructured information, and
Yeah.
how AI is helping in pulling that information out?
Yeah. You know, I think I would break this down into three different areas, and
Right,
I'm
right.
actually gonna go in reverse order because the first one that I would say is I think that's something everyone's seen. It's like, I've got a document or a set of documents. I can ask some questions and get something out. That's
Right.
pretty standard. Everyone's seen that now. But there's two other ones that I don't think are as well recognized, but are having huge impact, especially for customers we see right now. The first is security, and I'm going to keep going back to security because it is important. But the ability of AIs to understand and classify documents, in a way that's never been possible before. You're probably familiar with DLP or CASB tools that are generally sort of like the firewall for content in an organization, prevents anything with a, specific sort of like PII, like social security numbers or, confidential words. And they've been sort of, hit or miss with accuracy because they're based on just, keywords and pattern matching overall. Well, now we have AIs, and we have this great example in our AI-driven Shield Pro product where you can take the security team and compliance team's definition of different classifications: public, confidential, internal only, or like strictly, strictly enforced. And then the AI will read that definition and then look at a document and then suggest this is what the classification should be. So there's this huge opportunity for AI for security that I think
Hmm.
people are overlooking right now because everyone's really focused on some of the other whiz bang stuff. And then I was going to get into workflow, but let me see if you have any questions on that security piece first.
So yeah, let's get into that security piece a bit more into that, right? I think I know you're also talking about compliance, and then this is where it gets even more interesting because now when you are working across different customers and different channels of data, how do you make sure that uh, it is handled in the right way? Because I might be working on numerous number of projects, and at
Yeah.
the same time, I think I have much of the content. Could you talk a bit about how security and compliance is handled in this kind of a scenario?
Absolutely. And this is where a true content platform like Box differentiates from like just stuffing stuff in an Amazon S3 or a Google or
Right,
Azure
right.
bucket or something like that. Because like go back to those FDA approval processes that a life sciences company would
Hmm.
go through.
Hmm.
There is a set of compliance regulations about how those documents have to be treated when they're in use, how they have to be treated when they're then submitted to the FDA, and how they have to be treated for a period of almost 20 years afterwards, and in some cases, even longer. And the policies around data retention, the ability to do legal holds, the ability to archive and delete, like the ability to prove something was actually deleted from disk is actually very critical in a lot of these areas. And so, with Box, what we're doing now is enforcing those compliance rules basically under the covers transparently to the user, regardless of what tool or what process they're doing on top of it. And that's very, very valuable. We've always tried to make security, and this was an interesting learning for me coming here and working directly with Aaron Levy, our CEO and co-founder. He was always like, look, we can't make security get in people's way. When security
Right,
gets in people's way, they just go around it. So we have
right.
to figure out how to embed it so that it is seamless. And in fact, our tool helps them make the right security decisions. And that's something I'm proud to say I think we've done better than really anyone else in the space.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's now continue further. And what are the other aspects that you would like to touch upon when we talk about these content management and how do you make AI work better? And how do you, uh, like, when companies are thinking about how do I safely access and reason over this enterprise content while still maintaining all this governance and policy or privacy and all
Yeah.
other kind of restrictions? Because that gets even more interesting, right? I think when we
Yeah.
talk about and important as well.
And now we get into the world of topic that you've covered on this podcast many times, which is this evolution of AI from an assistant-based sort of Q&A system into a
Hmm.
true model of agents that do work for you.
Hmm.
And all of the things that happen in an organization, whether we know it or not, is some type of structured workflow process. In the simplest form, that workflow could be something that's tracked through emails or spreadsheets or, some type of task manager. But in the more complicated form, like a loan processing, the FDA approvals we talked about, a lot of stuff in government, there's a bunch of steps of processes, involves a bunch of different people inside and outside the organization, and decision points where these workflows kind of fork and move around and those kinds of things. And we are seeing huge improvements in accuracy, in speed, and throughput and performance of these would have traditionally been human-based processes, sort of guided by a workflow tool or a case management tool, with AI agents going in and augmenting humans and helping drive that
Hmm.
along. So there's a bunch of tools that have kind of become popular out there where, in these decision nodes in some type of workflow process, you now have an agent that has, a human written set of criteria. So take a sales deal approval.
Right.
Some of the simplest rules are if it's over $1 million, it has to go to the CFO. If it's under $1 million, it goes here. But those can become very complex very quickly. And the AI is really good at taking that already written down set of rules, applying it to a certain thing, and then making a recommendation then to a human that could go from there. So this migration from, assistants that maybe ask questions or summarize documents into the world of agents, and that's where we've been spending a lot of our time. and not just like one agent, but agents that call other agents and these really deep models. That's where true AI productivity gains are happening in a lot of customers that we are working with right now.
Beautiful. I think there's an interesting thing that happened for me. I think a couple of days back. I know, like you were briefly talking about these agents working in tandem when we talk about insurance or mortgage and other things. I get a call from, it's not my agent. I don't want to talk about the name of the insurance company
Mm-hmm.
for confidentiality purposes, but I think it was strange. I think what happened is that I know when we are moving from a AI assistant world, or from a generative world into an agentic world, and
Yeah.
how this was really scary too. Like I get a message or something like a automated call, and I and then I was dropped off the insurance, and then I had to call
Mm-hmm.
realistically my actual insurance agent and
Uh-huh.
ask exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
she was petrified. She
Ah.
said that because I've been working with her and her insurance agency for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And what happened? I think maybe they're updating their systems with a
Yeah.
lot of these agents happening. And then,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, I think there might be one particular thing which might have triggered a set of actions. And
Yeah.
if it was not properly attributed or properly maintained, I think you'll get into some kind of
Yeah.
issues. So the reason why I'm talking about this is I know since a company like Box sits in that middle layer where you kind of have access to not only all this information in enterprise systems or customer systems, but
Right.
also how the customers or the end users interact with the systems, right? I
Yeah.
think so.
Well,
Do you want to talk a bit about
yeah.
that and how why this might have happened and how a Box kind of a company can handle this much better?
I think it's a great example, and I think your experience is one that highlights what we're seeing is that most organizations are not moving to an AI only sort of decision tree. They're using to an AI augmented human still in the loop decision tree.
Mhm.
And human in the loop, I think, is going to be a term that is going to persist for a long time and actually become even more important. And I'll give you an example, sort of on the other side that we're seeing. We've got a number of customers, a few dozen customers now that are using this sort of like AI agent model to speed up something that a lot of us deal with sometimes, which is loan processing. So whether you're buying a house, a car, something like that, there's this whole big process that happens. First off, you have a whole set of documents you have to submit. Someone then, on the bank side is pulling the relevant information out of that. It's going into a spreadsheet. There's another person that looks at the risk models. There's another person that does this and this. A human finally at one point says yes, and then a whole bunch of documents have to be created. That process has very often, infuriatingly, taken weeks off of human
True.
time and whatnot. We have now several customers that have used AI to do things like when you upload a whole bunch of documents, it's going to automatically extract the metadata and the values and all the thing that's relevant for making that decision. Then it's going to go into, and a different agent is then actually going to help do the credit risk calculation. And it's not going to say yes or no, you're approved. I think you probably had an example where they gave the agent too much control over yes or no, you were covered. But the agent's going to make a recommendation to a human that's going to look at various things. And that recommendation is going to be much more succinct, much more highlighting the things that need to be looked at and actually make the human more productive. And then AI can help with other parts of the document generation and other parts. But we've had people that have gone, companies that are, do this every single day. It is their primary revenue source, where it's taken weeks to get, a simple loan done to they're doing it within hours.
Mhm.
Because all of that busy work, all of that, metadata extraction, all of those decision points, all that kind of stuff that rote, sort of manual labor can be automated with these agents and then, speed up the humans. And they've got the same amount of staff, but they're doing so much more business because they're now able to, just increase the throughput of everyone and get the humans focused on what's the actual important decision to make.
True, true. I think I very well adhere to echo your thoughts on this. Like the process now, whether it is loan processing or many of these things, could be much more fastened. And then, and like you mentioned, I think much of the time you will still have a human in the loop, which
Right.
will have to make sure that things happen uh, at the right speed and the right latency and the right amount of decisions are
Yeah.
triggering
Yeah.
down.
And all of these processes, all these workflows, they're all based on that unstructured content, those documents, that data that is the heart and soul of, most organizations' business.
Right. I know now many CIOs and architects are rethinking how their data and application landscapes and where this intelligent content layer will fit into their modern application landscape or their modern enterprise architecture, right? In a world of these AI driven applications and agents. Any thoughts or any things that you have how this have to be uh, thought through, whether it is an enterprise architect or whether it's the CIO when thinking about these kind of complex
Yeah.
landscapes?
Well, it is an interesting time, I think, for everyone in technology. Like you've been in this industry a long time, just like I have, and we've seen a number of mega cycles.
Right,
This
right.
one, I would say, is as big, bigger, probably the biggest that we're seeing in the last 30 years. But it's also moving so incredibly fast. I mean, it's interesting, from the time that we're recording this to the time that it launches, I expect there's going to be, one or two major new things that happen in AI, whether it's the next major model or like the next tool or the, something that comes out or whatnot that you're literally on sort of a week by week basis. So the first thing that I am seeing with all the CIOs I talk to, and I've traveled literally around the world in the past 4 weeks talking to CIOs in all different places, is that they know they're going to have to make changes. So they're making decisions today with the durability of maybe a year or two. They'd like to have some thoughts, and so now they're thinking of some base core principles of how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about we want to have model neutrality. So like what's the best model today might be a totally different model tomorrow, might be from a totally different vendor. We need to have that. They absolutely have to have data security and sovereignty. And while it's probably the worst named acronym in tech in a long time, but the notion of a secure RAG, a retrieval
Mhm.
augmented generation ability to keep your data separate from the AI and do all that is like top of mind for everyone because they need it to be permissions aware and know what the human should have access to. And then again, these more deep agent ways of looking at things, where we're getting to the point again where the AI demos seem so magical. We
Mhm.
forget all of the capability in between there. And I was just talking to our CTO earlier. It's like we've actually got to show those steps. We have to show the complexity that went into that because otherwise it just looks like something that's a canned response overall. But no, that tool really just went and did all that stuff, and it took a fair amount of time because it was processing 500,000 documents. So like, let's be sure people understand just how real of a big effort that is now.
Beautiful. I think I like the aspect, I think, of a secure RAG. I think that is getting even more important, I think, with all these things happening around.
Yeah. Well, on that one, so I'm
Yeah.
curious what you're seeing in your conversations, because in my conversations now, at least in North America, almost 100% of companies I talk to have now in production some type of enterprise chat system. There's a bunch
Mhm.
of commercial ones out there, or maybe they've rolled their own, and the problem is that a lot of them are not actually RAG based. A lot of them are dump your data in, we'll
Yeah.
train our LLM, and then you can answer questions. And the first time, and there's been some documented cases of this where, they put a whole bunch of like HR data in, and then all of a sudden people are able to ask questions of like, what's Raghu's salary? And they're not supposed to have access to that, but the LLM doesn't know that. So there's this huge, sort of leap forward on these use cases for an LLM that's trained on your data. But a lot of people haven't thought about that RAG architecture, like my security model.
Right, right. I think that's a great point. Let's get it a bit more into the box. I know you guys have been embedding AI a lot into these content workflows. Uh, but there will be some questions, right? I think how do you decide where AI can add real value versus where there is more, it can become a noise, right? I think
Mhm.
we see scenarios or we see instances when because customers when they don't have much of they know how their process works, they know what they have to get it done, But the thing is, like when a new technology comes in, or when there is so much of buzz happening,
Yeah,
customers are so much into that that uh, they want to see that they are ahead of their competitor, and they want to embed some kind of
yeah,
AI into that. So I believe you might be hearing a lot of that. How do you try to kind of
yeah.
separate the noise out of the signal?
It's pretty interesting because, we actually are not trying to sell our AI. We actually
Right,
literally don't even have an LLM.
right,
We partner with, and this was something that Aaron and Ben, our CEO and CTO, came up with, just as the ChatGPT moment was happening a little over 3 years ago. It's like we need to actually build a platform. And that
right.
platform needs to be model agnostic. It needs to be secure. It needs to be enterprise aware. It needs to, have all these different things. And therefore, unlike OpenAI or Anthropic or Microsoft, we're not trying to sell you our LLM. We are trying to make AI usable in a secure enterprise environment in all these different use cases. So that's been the first thing, and that's a big difference overall. Then where you use it, there's a whole bunch of different pieces there. But this, I'm curious, like, in your conversations, the difference between building a platform for making AI safe versus just like people that are just getting an LLM and dumping stuff into it. What are you seeing as sort of the current, best practice from enterprise CIOs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I believe I see quite a bit difference in how people are leveraging this, or people are uh, kind of getting into this, right? I think the thing is, some of the conversations tend to that, hey, I have this kind of new technology, I want to dump in all these documents and see what kind of things will come out of this, and what
Yeah.
kind of and how I can now and I have my process. I'm kind of have this particular end-to-end process, and this is the thing that I'm doing. So how can this kind of make it in a better way? How can I resolve these issues? So we see all kinds of questions, all kinds of conversations leading into that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so to get back to your core question of how do we decide where AI adds real value is the power of these tools is both in the notion of a structured workflow process, and that was, I said that there are three main things: security,
Mhm.
workflows, and then just the original sort of like AI assistant piece. And so we talked about the structured workflows, but going back to one of the first use cases, which is just like open up a document and just be able to ask any question of it, or open up. In
Mhm.
our case, we have something called a hub where people can put a whole bunch of documents in and then ask a question of all those documents. Really much more powerful than just your standard searching and filtering and that kind of thing. And there is, I think, a really big value in these AI tools of them being sort of a general purpose Swiss Army knife, where it's like, oh, well, I can actually use this to write a blog, or I can use this
Mhm.
to fill out an RFP, or I can use this to do these things. And what we've done is we've actually given customers the ability to create those. Those are agents as well, and so it's, a choose a model, give it a prompt, provide some files that provide background on like here's the brand voice or here's our RFP template or something like that, and then decide who in the company, if not everyone, should have access to it, and then it just becomes a simple drop down. So when you log into Box, where it used to be a list of files and folders that you'd find all of your content in, it's now just an AI question box, and you choose your files you want to work on, you choose your agent you want to use, or just the straight model, and then you just go to town from there. And that's actually become very, very powerful because it's no longer people thinking, oh, I need to download that PowerPoint so that I can work on it, for the next presentation or something like that. It's like, oh no, I need to actually like figure out how I'm gonna, structure this entire new financial plan. And I've got files, I don't even know where they are,
Mhm.
inbox. I'm just going to like start with a pretty robust prompt, and I'm going to iterate from there. And it's all about the enterprise context. The biggest difference between what we do versus what someone would use like enterprise GPT, or even Claude Cowork or something, is that we have the enterprise knowledge. And when
Mhm.
that's in there and it's secure and permissions aware and you're keeping it within Box, then our AI platform, again, we're just calling out to all the best models out there, is able to do so much more than taking a few of those files and dumping them somewhere else and then asking some questions.
Beautiful. I think great that you brought the context of the cloud co-work. I know we've been seeing quite a lot of these questions coming in from the conversations that we are having that, hey, cloud co-work can do this, we can get a lot of these things done. But I think enterprise context is one thing which is missing quite a bit. And that
Yeah.
is the important thing that you need to take care, because you can maybe solve a couple of things or a couple of queries or a couple of use cases with cloud cowork or whatever, but unless until you have that real enterprise context, you cannot proceed further in these complex um, hybrid landscapes that we are working with.
Yeah.
So let us now I want to see, you don't need to name any customers or anything, but could you share an example of how this intelligent content services like extraction or summarization or classification? I know you talked a bit about that, but is there a way that you can see how it can change these downstream business decisions in the
Yeah.
context of Box?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. And I sort of touched on this earlier with the loan origination story, but
Right, right,
I
right.
was just in Australia 2 weeks ago, and I had the pleasure of meeting with the CIO of one of their largest banks overall, which is going all in with Box for only part of their loan processing part, which is literally the extraction of information from all these documents that customers upload. And traditionally in this market, there have been a set of tools generally called intelligent document processing or IDP tools, which used early forms of AI like ML and pattern recognition. But you'd have to have a form like an invoice or something that you could draw boxes around and look for field colon value and pull it out, and they were like 60% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
We hooked up early on. We hooked up, just the basic LLMs and our basic platform to what we call metadata template. And metadata is the information about a file. And then
Mm-hmm.
just ask the LLMs, like, here's the file, fill out the metadata. And they were pretty accurate right from the beginning. High 80s just off the bat. And interestingly, able to extract information not just from a structured invoice form, but from like a long legal contract or a lease or something where you have to read and understand it overall. So really, really powerful. Now, after some refinement, after some improvements and a couple of, technology acquisitions, the latest frontier models in the box extract system, human level accuracy is considered about 93%, just kind of a long-standing thing. Humans are not perfect. We all know that. The frontier models from two of the biggest providers with the box extract framework is getting 94 to 96% accuracy. So we are exceeding human level accuracy. We're doing it faster. We're doing it cheaper, and it can really speed it up. And the bank that I was meeting with in Australia, they actually invested building their own extract platform using a top tier model and a whole bunch of tooling and infrastructure. And they spent, probably a couple $1 million doing that. They realized very quickly that their core business is not about building AI
True.
platforms and infrastructure. Their core business is in making loans. So they're going all in with Box, using Box Extract for that one part of the process, and then they're looking at all the other processes after that.
Beautiful. I think that's a great example. I think it highlights the value of how uh, the customers or the end customers, they can focus a lot more on their challenges, on their problems that they need to solve, and how Box can help take care of the things that have to be taken care in the context of uh, the intelligent content cloud that you guys have built.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So let's. I know it took a while, but I think generally I come to this question. I term this as the extra AI question, the $1 million or the $1 billion question.
Sure.
I know I know the competition is intense. The platforms, there are crowded platforms out there. What is that truly differentiates Box from the competitive products or the competition out there?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's important, and we have to be able to explain it every day. And it's actually pretty simple. So I would classify this, that there's, I think, two big ecosystems. There is the ecosystem of the pure play providers coming from OpenAI and Anthropic and all those. And then there's the ecosystem of the embedded, AI tools, whether it's Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini or those kinds of things. And there's a very simple differentiation for both, which is Box has already your enterprise context. We have the knowledge, the information, the work that people are doing overall. And whether, you want to do something that is, a complex problem that Claude Cowork may be really great at helping you understand, the fact that Box has instant access, pre-vectorized, secure, and permission aware is hugely beneficial. And we can do that and basically get the same results with, especially the new Box agent that we just released this week. And on the other side, the copilots, the Geminis, I talk to a lot of customers like, oh yeah, we're fully in production with AI. We've got Copilot running. And I'm like, what is it doing for you? It's like it does a really bad job at formatting slides. Like it doesn't have the enterprise context to actually, be of use overall. So there's a huge difference where those are just sort of like the assistants that are, not very helpful when it comes to actually, producing the work. And so it all comes down to the data and the access you have. And with Box, the beauty is your data is already in Box, and from day one, it's been permission aware. And I've touched on it multiple times, but the biggest difference is we never invoke AI until we know for sure the user that's asking the question should have access to that file. So everything starts with a permissions check before AI is
Mhm.
even contemplated overall. And that's completely different than the way that any of the other tools are working because, again, they're taking whatever data you provide to it, they're sucking it into a general LLM and losing all of the knowledge of who should have access to what. And I think we're going to start to see some pretty nasty internal breaches. There's already been a lot of documented cases where people have asked one of these tools a question they shouldn't have access to. They get that information, and then everyone's like, "Oh no, we've really got to rethink this whole AI architecture." So that's having the data and knowing who should have access to it and maintaining that through the AI tool chain is super critical.
Beautiful. I think I like the piece when you said, I think the permission check and the security aspect, right? I think the example which I was quoting like a couple of days back, and later on, the agent confirmed that it seems that the request came from another customer to drop off the insurance.
Oh,
And
okay.
there was, so the request came from someone else.
Right.
And like you mentioned, like if that proper permission checks were not in place, maybe it picked up some, the name might be closer or
Yeah.
something like whatever heck might have happened. But that is very important. I like the way you have explained that in the context of how Box differentiates from the rest of the competition out there.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's get into. I want to get into the little bit of a future. I think when you look ahead 2 to 3 years, what is that shift in the enterprise platforms you think most leaders are underestimating now, and what
Yeah.
and how do you see that?
Well, this is probably the first time in my career where looking 2 to 3 years out seems very amorphous because the roadmaps we're looking at and the pace of innovation going on makes, the next 6 months,
Right.
kind of the horizon we're looking at because we're also developing product faster than we ever have and using AI tools to ship stuff that would have taken, 18 to 24 months before. And now we're doing it in 3 to 6. So that's been really exciting. But I mean, here's what I'll say. I do believe that AI is going to force a tipping point for a lot of just core data center, cloud migration, architectural revamp that a lot of customers have ignored for many, many years. I mean, we were having, and you were probably part of these discussions, conversations about, cloud versus on-prem, 10, 12 years ago. That has changed and softened, but I still talk to a lot of customers that still are like, oh no, everything's in our data center. We actually even want to run the LLMs locally. I'm like, well, OpenAI spent $1 billion in its last training run for GPT-5. Are you going to spend that much on your private LLM? And so, being able to access these things and finally moving to a cloud architecture that is secure, that is compliant, is I think AI is going to help drive that because it's not just like where mobile, made people more productive and it's mandatory, but it's still a nice to have. Like if you're not doing these AI things, you are going to fall behind the competition and you will get eaten alive in the marketplace. So everyone has to figure it out, and everyone has, if they have not already gotten their architecture in a way where they're ready to take advantage of it. And every Box customer is ready to take advantage of it today. So if you're not there already, then like you're gonna have a really quick transition into a world where you can then take advantage of these AI tools.
True, true. I think very well said. I know 2 to 3 years time frame is tough to look ahead in the current circumstances. I think things are changing quite fast, quite rapidly, and but the points that you've noted, I think the points that you've raised about security and compliance, and these are some of those things which really echo a lot uh, in my daily work as well, within SAP, outside of SAP, wherever I talk about, because governance in AI is going to be one of those key aspects. I think I know it's not going to be just humans. I think we have now agents coming in and interactions with while interactions within humans, like you said, are error prone. Agents, I think hallucinations with agents are going to be even more
Mhm.
drastic. And then now interactions between humans and agents and all these things, I think, and how do you share the content and how do you
Yeah.
understand what is correct and what is not?
Right. And that's what we mean
Before,
by
yeah.
enterprise grade. Like we put a ton of effort into our system prompts and everything to eliminate hallucinations, to require that the agents, showing its work and references and all those kinds of things. It's a enterprise grade AI is something that, not a lot of organizations, not a lot of vendors have really figured out yet.
Right, right. So before we wrap up this conversation, I would like to thanks for having this detailed conversation, providing your insights.
Yeah, it's been
What
great.
are those What are those key takeaways uh, you want to leave the enterprise architects or the product leaders or the AI strategists to hold on to, like this conversation? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, kind of similar to where we started, even before we talked about AI, we talked about security and the fact that, the gravity of your data, where that is, you need to have it in a platform that can be secure, that can be enabled for AI, and can still make your users productive. So that's been our whole focus overall. So that's really key. But on the AI side, I encourage people to really think about those base level principles. So don't go all in with one vendor. Don't assume that anyone, even if it's like bundled for free in your subscription, don't assume that they're going to have the best long-term solution for what you want to do. Think about model flexibility and being able to choose different models. Think about how this agent world's going to evolve and the type of configuration you need to make, not just your users have a cute sort of like, document summarization or turn this into a poem, but like literally to get work done for them. And think about how, AI is going to change everything from those workflows to those security pieces, and that your tooling is going to change, but your data
Mhm.
won't. And so like finding out how to make sure that you can leverage that and integrate in. Like we didn't even touch on MCP, but like
Mhm.
one of the biggest uses of AI within Box right now is that one of our top integrations, besides a first class integration into Microsoft Office and Google Workspace, Salesforce integrates directly into Box and all the content's there.
Mhm.
Agentforce, agents are now calling Box agents through MCP. The Box agents going, getting all that data very quickly, responding back. It's a beautiful connection between these different tools where they have access to the right data in the right places. Like that's the kind of architecture I think that is going to win in the future. And so you need a platform that can do all of those things with your content and the AI together.
Beautiful. I think, yeah, uh, rightfully mentioned that, yeah, we didn't even touch on the MCP and the other things that are happening. I know there's quite a bit happening out there. Before we close, I think, how do you see? I know I'm putting this question in a different way. How do you see AI reshaping this overall platforms or content, uh, intelligent content in the
Yeah.
context of AI? How do you see all this kind of evolving?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think there's a lot of people in enterprise SaaS, which is where we are, that have been worried about like, oh, well, now people can vibe code their CRM tool or their
Right,
HR
right.
tool or all those kinds of things. The truth is, you can't vibe code compliance. You can't vibe code security. In fact, vibe coding is the worst thing possible for security and those kinds of things. So we're very confident that in the long run, the value of a platform like ours will be keeping your content safe, secure, and compliant overall, and then accessible and usable to these AI tools. So that in the long run is the big differentiator versus all these other. Again, there's a lot of vendors trying to sell you their AI, but they're not paying attention to all those other pieces. And we have 20 calendar years and millions of man hours going into building this stuff, and we've got some of the most impressive global compliance capabilities overall. Very proud that my team has built a lot of those things, and that's not something that's gonna just people are going to pop up and do, in a weekend project working with Claude Code or something like that.
Beautiful. I like the way you put it, like you cannot wipe code security or wipe code compliance. I think I would like to end with that. I think that's a great piece of advice and a great saying.
Yep.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for sharing your insights, Rand. It was a pleasure having this conversation with you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Rand, thank you. This was a really powerful conversation. What becomes very clear is this. As we move into a world of AI agents that don't just assist, but act, the real question is no longer what AI can do, but what AI is allowed to do and on what knowledge it is acting. Because agents won't operate on dashboards. They will operate on enterprise knowledge, contracts, policies, documents, decisions. And that brings us to the core shift. Governance is no longer a control layer. It becomes the operating system for AI. To our listeners, and if you're thinking about copilots or agents in your enterprise, ask yourself, do you trust the knowledge your AI is using? And more importantly, can you prove it? That's where the next wave of enterprise architecture will be defined. Thank you for tuning in to XTraw AI, where we continue to extract the raw AI conversations shaping the future of AI agents and enterprise systems. Stay tuned. The next conversations get even more interesting. Happy predicting the future with XTraw AI.